Good morning, everybody. Sorry it's been a while. I've recently been on holiday and then unfortunately been a bit ill. So this video hasn't come out as quick as I wanted it to. But today we're going to talk through the changes in the latest Warhammer 40K April update. There's some really interesting things in there and some things that I kind of wish weren't, to be honest. But we'll go through the main ones. We'll leave out all the Games Workshop chuff that they fluff it out with at the top. There's no need for us to read through that. So let's get into the bits that we're actually bothered about. So core rules, changes and clarifications. Several questions and clarifications have been sent to us that concern the Warhammer 40k rulebook itself. Where necessary, we have updated our errata and FAQ document to address these questions, but a summary of them can be found below. This one really gave me sort of pause for thought. We often talk about the spirit of the game and that we want the game to be fun, but also we want it to be played in a way that's fair for everybody. At the end of the day, I do enjoy list building and building a list that will defeat my opponent. You call it list tailoring if you like. As does my opponent, which is usually Ryan. So we would usually sort of start off, that's the army I'm going to bring, that's the army I'm going to bring, and then, you know, think of the worst case scenario that he's going to do with that army and adapt to that. But we're both playing it with the same mindset when we do that. Or if we say we're going to have a fluffy game and we leave out all of the real heavy hitters, again, we're in the spirit of the game with each other. This first one was really odd because it's about wobbly models. So we've had several questions asking for clarity about how exactly the wobbly model syndrome rule should be used to place models in counts as locations. We're a bit surprised by these questions. To be clear, our intent for wobbly model syndrome was that it should serve only as a hint or tip to prevent models from getting damaged should they be placed in a location where they would be in danger of falling over if the table was to be accidentally nudged during play. So, for instance, top of a ruin, you've probably seen it with me with Mortarion Orion with his gunship. We'd place it maybe on a lower level. We'd tell you that in a video usually, but that's to stop the model falling over and getting damaged. You know, the Mortarion model, for instance, was, I don't know, £60–70 when it came out, maybe a little bit more even. You know, a lot of intricate bits. You don't want that falling over and getting smashed to pieces. However, it appears that some people have been taking advantage of this position, unfortunately. It was not intended to be a rule that enables you to place a model in a position where it could not otherwise physically be placed. So it looks like some people haven't been playing, as we say, within the spirit of the game and attempting to use it for personal gain. I haven't seen that personally. I think a lot of things are quite common sense. You can sort of look at them and think, that's not how it's meant to be played. And to be honest, the fact that this needs clarifying is a little bit worrying. This other one as well, this next one, the edge of the battlefield. Again, I've played many editions of the game from second ed, and it's been the same thing all the way through, that if your model is off the table in any way, shape or form, it's destroyed. End of story. So it's come to our attention that there is nothing in the rules that technically prevents a model from moving off the edge of a battlefield. As all good wargamers know, the edge of the battlefield is essentially the edge of the universe when it comes to the battle at hand. To correct this oversight, we're adding the following errata to the Warhammer 40k rulebook, which is reprinted here for convenience. So it states, add the following sentence to the end of the first paragraph. This is from page 177 moving. No part of a model or its base can be set up or moved over the edge of the battlefield. Again, the fact that this has needed updating absolutely baffles me. You know, I've watched a few videos about people's thoughts on this, and actually Tabletop Tactics did raise a valid point that there's some models within some deployment scenarios, however slim they might be, cannot physically fit all their army within the deployment zone because, say, like a flyer's base would be just too big. I mean, in that case, I at the very beginning of the game would have no problem with letting my opponent set up with his model just slightly off the edge of the board if he physically cannot do anything else to fit that model in the deployment zone. Once the game progressed, however, I would fully expect that he made adjustments to make sure that that model was on the battlefield, and obviously if anything went off the edge, then that would be destroyed. I mean, that's fairly common sense, and the fact that people are looking at loopholes to exploit doesn't show them in a favourable light, in my opinion. You know, the game is tactical, the game is fun. At the end of the day, when I face an opponent, I want to beat them because of my skill. Yes, we all know it's a dice game and there's dice rolls involved, and Lady Luck just sometimes just takes a big shit on your head and does not want to play ball. There's nothing we can do about that. However, tactically, that is all down to me. The decisions I make, the units I move to engage other units, the plan that I have in place to hold that objective, the plan that I have in place to score those victory points, that's all down to me. And that's what I like about the game. You know, the fact that it's me, my mind versus somebody else, almost like a game of chess to some degree. Moves, counter moves, and by using things like, you know, models off the edge of the board, or, you know, wobbly model syndrome with your flyer bases, and it just, yeah, there's no need for it at all. So that was a bit of a shock. The next big one, disembarking from destroyed transports. So it turns out that there's nothing in the core rules that prevents a unit that's been forced to disembark from its transport because it was destroyed as a result of an Overwatch attack from immediately declaring a charge, provided the rolls to see what models were destroyed weren't totally disastrous. That is, so obviously vehicle destroyed and rolls of a 1. This was never the intent, and some players have been exploiting this oversight and declaring charges against every possible unit in order to get their own transports destroyed so they can disembark their elite and very choppy units a few inches closer to the enemy to secure a vital charge. We imagine the units inside almost certainly have other things to contend with, like crawling out of the flaming wreckage of their former transport. To correct this, we're adding the following errata to the Warhammer 40K rulebook, which is reprinted here for convenience. So on page 183, embark, it says, as the following sentence to the end of the third paragraph, units cannot declare a charge during the same turn that they disembarked from a destroyed transport. So I think a lot of that was to do with people, I mean, I play orcs as well, absolutely bombing up their trucks or battle wagons, or whatever was carrying a unit, and wanting to be destroyed, so that they could just get out and charge into exactly where they wanted to be, with very little risk to themselves, obviously apart from the rolling a 1 when the vehicle's destroyed. So yeah, I can see why they've added that in, absolutely. Again, trying to sort of eke out an unfair advantage, I guess. But there's nothing there that would absolutely change my world to how I play anyway. Excuse me. So yeah, that's fairly okay. I can get that. Moving with units that can fly in the charge phase. So in the autumn 2018 update, we included an errata that changed the way the fly keyword interacts with the charge phase. This revision and the corresponding Codex FAQ updates were intended to answer a common question that arose when units that fly were attempting to charge units atop a tall terrain feature, or vice versa. The charge roll that was required was genuinely ambiguous. We believe the most elegant way to resolve this issue was simply to disallow units that can fly from ignoring intervening models and terrain during the charge phase. Since then, we've had a lot of feedback from players who feel that the inability to ignore intervening models when charging has unduly affected the effectiveness of their flying units. On reflection, we believe they are right, and this was certainly not our intent to affect the balance of any of these units by our changes. Some models were excluded only because certain terrain features, specifically certain fortifications such as bastions, bunkers, etc., are technically models and not terrain features. And we thought it was odd that a model that could fly could not charge over ruins, but they could charge over a bastion quite happily. As a result, we are replacing our previous errata and their corresponding Codex FAQ updates with revised versions. They will still prevent units from ignoring intervening terrain features such as ruins, sector mechanics, woods, etc. when charging, thereby clearing up the original ambiguities. But with the exception of buildings, allowing them to once again fly over intervening models. By buildings, what we mean here is specifically models with the building keyword, such as bastions, fortresses, or redemption, and certain other models with the fortification battlefield role. For absolute clarity, the change to this errata means that models that can fly cannot move across buildings or other terrain features as if they were not there when charging. They must instead move up, over, down, or around them as they would any other model. The following errata will all appear in their respective FAQ and errata documents, but they are reprinted here for your convenience. So page 177, moving, change the second paragraph to read, if the datasheet for a model says it can fly, then during the movement phase it can move across models as if they were not there. And when moving across terrain features, vertical distance is not counted against the total it can move, i.e. moving vertically is free for this model in the movement phase. If the datasheet for a model says it can fly, then during charge phase it can move across models other than buildings as if they were not there. And then there's a little bit about the Harlequins, the Necrons, the Death Watch. You can see that in their own specific erratas. Grey Knights as well. Aircraft. We have started to notice that aircraft, typically units with a fly at battlefield role and or a minimum move characteristic, are being used to block enemy units from moving. And we've received lots of feedback along the lines of, whilst the rules are very clear on the matter, it does feel contrary to and disconnected from the narrative. We agree. After all, the aircraft employing this tactic, whilst right in front of the enemy forces, are in fact imagined to be soaring high above the battlefield, not skimming over the surface. To that end, we are introducing an addition to the core movement phase rules. Please note that we have chosen to write this rule to first define aircraft units and give them an appropriate keyword. This is done so it will affect units with a minimum move characteristic, instead of those with the fly battlefield role. This is so that they apply to all units that are clearly aircraft but have a different battlefield role, like super heavy aircraft such as Marauder, bombers, Thunderhawk, gunships, etc. But not units that are clearly not aircraft, or that are designed to engage and dismember foes in melee on the ground, such as a Helldrake, Hive Chromes. Please also note that for the purposes of these rules, all units that have the hover jet ability are still classed as aircraft, even whilst they are hovering. The following errata will all appear in the Warhammer 40K rulebook FAQ and errata document, which is reprinted here for your convenience. A lot of these rule changes today have been an absolute mouthful to read out. Now I understand that they want to give as much information as possible, however, I'll be honest, I'm more interested in the rules and just a very quick description as to why they're needed. So, page 177, movement phase in the rulebook. Add the following text to the end of the movement phase section, aircraft. If a unit can fly and it has a minimum move characteristic, or if it has a damage table on its datasheet that includes any minimum move characteristics, that unit gains the aircraft keyword. Whenever a model makes any kind of move, it can be moved within 1 inch of enemy aircraft, and it can be moved across such models and their bases as if they were not there, but it cannot end the move on top of another model or its base, and it cannot end the move within 1 inch of any enemy units. If when a unit is selected to move in the movement phase, the only enemy units that are within 1 inch of the aircraft, then it can still make a move, i.e. it doesn't have to fall back in order to move. Okay. Very chunky. So there's a section about setting up models. Basically, we'll run through it now because it's pretty important actually. There are several abilities, stratagems and psychic powers that let players remove a unit from the battlefield and then set it back up in a different location, but these rules are causing some confusion. The confusion is partly because it is not clear whether or not any effects that apply to the unit before it is removed from the battlefield continue to apply when it is set back up, and also because the wording of this rule is sometimes written as the units being set up as if they were reinforcements, even though they are technically on the battlefield already. The intent of the "as if they were reinforcements" wording was to try and make it clear that the units had counted as moving for the purposes of moving and firing heavy weapons, and that they can't move further again this turn, other than to charge, pile in, or consolidate. After all, these units have potentially been displaced across the entire length of the battlefield already. This wording was also used to try and make it clear that such units would trigger other abilities or stratagems, such as outspec scans and early warning overrides, that are used when a unit is set up on the battlefield as reinforcements. Our feeling was that it shouldn't make a difference as to whether a unit teleported onto the battlefield from the orbiting spacecraft or from over the next hill. To clarify how these abilities, stratagems, and psychic powers work, we're adding the following FAQ to the Warhammer 40,000 rulebook, which is pre-printed here for your convenience. So the question: what rules apply to units that are moved from the battlefield after deployment via abilities, stratagems, and psychic powers, and are then set back up on the battlefield? Answer: if a rule or ability causes a unit to be removed from the battlefield and subsequently set up or set back up, the following rules apply to that unit. Number 1. Any rules that are triggered by or apply to units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements are also triggered by and apply to that unit when it is set up on the battlefield. 2. Models in that unit count as having moved a distance equal to their move characteristic that turn, and so suffer the penalty to their hit rolls for moving and firing heavy weapons. If the unit has a minimum move characteristic, it counts as having moved its maximum move characteristic. Number 3. Models in that unit cannot move again during that turn for any reason, other than to make a charge move, to pile in, or to consolidate. Number 4. If that unit was within 1 inch of an enemy unit when it was removed, it does not count as having fallen back when it is set back up on the battlefield. Number 5. If that unit has advanced during this turn, it still counts as having advanced after it has been set back up on the battlefield. Number 6. Any destroyed models in that unit, when it is removed, are still destroyed when their unit is set back up on the battlefield. If they were destroyed during this turn, they still count towards any morale tests taken for that unit this turn. Number 7. Any models in that unit that have lost any wounds do not regain these wounds when they are removed, and will still have lost them when their unit is set back up on the battlefield. Number 8. Any rules that unit was being affected by when it was removed, and which would continue to affect it for a specific duration, from abilities to stratagems, psychic powers, etc., continue to affect that unit until such a point as they would normally have no longer applied. For example, a unit that was within range of an aura ability when it was removed would no longer be affected by that ability if it was set up outside of that aura's range, whereas a unit that was affected by psychic power that lasted until the end of the turn would still be affected by it until the end of the term. So it's pretty straightforward, to be honest. If a unit was affected by something on the battlefield, and then you decide to, I don't know, go with whatever stratagem, psychic power, or whatever you've got, the unit still, it counts as moved to start with. That's important. So you can't then further move and then do a charge roll. Very, very important. But also you bring with you all of the negative bonuses. So if you were targeted by psychic power that, for instance, dropped your strength, that would still apply when you jump to your new location until the end of the turn, or the end of the psychic powers turn, effectively. It's pretty straightforward, to be honest. I quite like that. Very clarified. Not really got much problem with that. So note that points 5 to 8 do not apply to any units set up via the sustained assault rule. Any unit that has been added to your army during the battle and has been set up, such as those added by the demonic ritual ability, or units set up via any of the following stratagems: fresh converts, that's Adeptus Mechanicus, Tide of Traitors, Chaos Space Marines, Unstoppable Green Tide, Orcs, More Where They Came From, Vigilus Ablaze, Send in the Next Wave, Astra Militarum, and Endless Swarm, Tyranids. These stratagems represent new units joining the fight, rather than existing units being repositioned on the battlefield. Okay, so points 5 to 8 don't apply to that chunk of stratagems or codexes. Okay. Organised event guidelines. So I won't read the fluff, but this is about data sheets clarification. So are the Demon Prince data sheets from Codex Chaos Space Marines, the Demon Prince of Chaos data sheet from the Codex Chaos Demons, and the Demon Prince of Nurgle data sheet from Codex Death Guard, and the Demon Prince of Zeech data sheet from Codex Thousand Suns, all considered different data sheets for the purposes of the Organised Event Guidelines? No. For the purposes of these guidelines, all these data sheets are considered to be the same. So, to explain, very simply, people are bringing, because there's the rule of 3 in place, okay? So you can take 3 units of one data sheet, max. So people were bringing 3 Demon Princes from Codex Chaos Space Marines, they were bringing 3 from over there, 3 from Codex Death Guard. They were basically still being able to spam a table full of Demon Princes, because they were saying, well, it's from a different codex, it's from exactly. So Games Workshop have come out and blatantly said no. For the purpose of these guidelines, all the data sheets are considered the same. So it doesn't matter if you take 3 Demon Princes from Codex Space Marines, you ain't getting 3 Demon Princes from elsewhere. At least that's how I read it. That can only be good for the game. I think we all have units in our armies that are very powerful. Unless you create knights. But we all have units that are very good. let's be honest, and we would like to spam the hell out of them, because they generally are that powerful. And something else that could fill that slot wouldn't be as effective, so why would you take it? That leads to some very, very boring armies, some very elite armies, and I think by removing the rule of three, I thought was a good thing. Yes, it did hurt some of my army makeups, I'll agree. However, in general, I think it's a good thing. It makes me play a wider range of models than I perhaps would have played before. And the fact that they've just come out and said, you know, these little loopholes, again, spirit of the game, people are just finding little ways that they can abuse. Abuse is maybe a little bit strong, because, you know, Games Workshop did leave a door open there. However, they've now closed that door. The avenue's been shut off. So, next question. Are the heavy weapons sheet, are the heavy weapons squad data sheet from Codex Astra Militarum, Death Corps, blah 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 blah. Again, I'm not going to read through that because it's exactly the same question that was posed about the Demon Princes, but about Astra Militarum and using different data sheets, etc. No, for the purposes of all these guidelines, all these data sheets are considered to be the same. Excellent. Again, Astra Militarum, I have so many models that are good. I've got loads sat on the shelf there that fill different slots. Yes, I could spam all of one type, or at least I could until the rule of three. Or even, I suppose, with the ambiguity of this, before they've just completely and utterly clarified it. However, you know, it doesn't hurt me to only have 3 of one model at all, because I've got other options. And there's a lot of armies out there that are the same. Yes, there's some that aren't. I agree before people comment. And then, is the Cult Lehman Russ data sheet from Codex Genestealer Cults and the Lehman Russ data sheet from Codex Astra Militarum considered to be a different data sheet for the purposes of the organised events guidelines? What about Cult Scout Sentinels and Scout Sentinels? Cult Armour Sentinels and Armour Sentinels? Brood Brother Infantry Squads and Infantry Squads, and Brood Brothers Heavy Weapon Squads and Heavy Weapon Squads? That's a very big question, again. No. If by deleting the word cult or Brood Brothers from the data sheets tied to the Codex Genestealer Cults, they match another data sheet, then for the purposes of these guidelines, those data sheets are considered to be the same. Okay. Note that in the case of Demon Princes and Brood Brother Heavy Weapon Squads, both Chaos and Genestealer Cult armies have access to rules by which they can add new units to their army during the battle, e.g. Demonic Ritual, Telepathic Summons, as is the case of any unit that is added to your army during the battle. The restrictions listed in the Organised Event Guidelines of how many times the same data sheet can be included in your army do not apply to units added to your army during the battle. This means that if your collection includes, for example, more than 3 Demon Princes, they can still use them all in your game, but you'll have to summon the 4th and subsequent ones by Demonic Ritual in order to do so. Does still leave a door open, however you've got to build a list around that. Nothing too bad. Okay. Finalised match play rules. If you're still with me at this point, you're a champion, and I salute you. Because it's quite a meaty update. However, some really good things come out of it. So, Bolt of Discipline. They've made some changes to it. So, when we spoke about the better beta bolters, what a stupid name. Way back when, I said I can see this being solidified. However, with possibly a few tweaks, and that's what's come to pass. They've tweaked it slightly. And it's not a bad thing. necessarily. It does make me weep slightly because I was getting ready to wield my Land Raider again with beautiful Hurricane bolters. But I can see why they've made the change. I've watched a few battle reports and people have just ripped things apart because of this rule. So effectively, Bolter Discipline, all Adeptus Astartes, Heretic Astartes and Fallen models gain this ability. Instead of following the normal rules for rapid fire weapons, models in this unit rapid fire bolt weapons make double the number of attacks if any of the following apply. The firing model's target is within half the weapon's maximum range. The firing model is infantry, and every model in its unit remains stationary in the previous movement phase. Infantry. The firing model is a Terminator, Biker, Centurion, Dreadnought, or Hellbrute. So it does apply to Dreadnoughts, Terminators, Bikers, Centurions, Hellbrutes. It no longer affects vehicles. That is effectively the sort of rub of this now. Whereas before it affected vehicles and flyers, it no longer does. So goodbye, Hurricane Bolter, Land Raider, staring at. Yeah, I get it. I think the rule was intended to bolster infantry, to get people bringing maybe tactical marines back onto the tabletop, like we discussed. Of course, the rule didn't quite stop there, and you could just use it on other fun stuff, slightly more heavily armoured. But everybody was doing it, which was fair. Unless, of course, you don't play Space Marines, and then you probably felt it was unfair. Swingers and roundabouts, but again, nothing massive, and that's pretty cool. Prepared positions. So that's the stratagem that if you go second in the first turn, that you can spend command points to give yourself cover. Basically, they've brought it in but changed it ever so slightly so that the new rules basically don't apply to Titanic units or aircraft and units with a fortification or fly battlefield roles. Again, nothing majorly bad there. Why should an aircraft zooming around the sky get an added +1 to its save for cover? Because this stratagem don't quite make sense. So I get it. Tactical restraint. The tactical restraint match play rule was introduced as a beta back in autumn 2018. Based on your feedback, we've clarified that command points gained via psychic powers are included, and one small change to exclude command points that are spent on stratagems that are used before the battle has begun from being refunded at all. This is now the final form of this match play rule. Tactical restraint. There are several warlord traits, relics, psychic powers and abilities that give you a chance to gain or refund command points. Each player can only gain or have refunded a total of 1 command point per battle round as a result of such rules, regardless of the source, and command points that were spent on stratagems that are not used during a battle round, such as those that are used before battle, can never be refunded. The limit of gaining or refunding 1 command point per battle round does not apply to the Moment Shackle or the Sevenfold Chant abilities, or to or the player of the Twilight Warlord trait. In these cases, the ability/warlord trait can refund or gain the player more than 1 command point if the stratagem used costs 2 or more command points to use. But once any command points have been gained as a result of the rule, Neither it nor any similar rule can be used to gain any more command points until the next battle round. Also note that this does not apply to command points that are gained or refunded as specifically instructed on stratagems, e.g. feeder tendrils and agents of Veit. Okay, what have we got left? Realistically, tactical reserves. The Tactical Reserves match play rule was revised as an updated beta version back in autumn 2018. This is now the final form of this match play rule. Instead of being set up on the battlefield during deployment, many units have the ability to be set up in the teleportarum, in high orbit, in ambush, etc., in order to arrive on the battlefield mid-game as reinforcements. When setting up your army during deployment for a match play game, at least half the total number of units in your army must be set up on the battlefield. The combined points value of all the units you set up on the battlefield during deployment, including those that embarks upon transports that are set up on the battlefield, must be at least half of your army's total points value, even if every unit in your army has an ability that would allow them to be set up elsewhere. Okay, that seems the same. Furthermore, in match play games, units that are not placed on the battlefield during deployment in order to arrive on the battle mid-game as reinforcements cannot arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round. Finally, any unit that has not arrived on the battlefield by the end of the third battle round in match play game counts as having been destroyed. Yeah, I'm not a fan of this rule. Personally speaking, I think it absolutely neuters some assault armies from being able to get going quickly. Yeah, it forces you to play a certain way, and I'm not a big fan of being forced down one avenue. I can build shooty armies, I can build a mix of armies, or I could build a full assault army. However, I'm neutering myself massively because they can't enter play on first turn. So you're kind of taking away my option for that avenue and saying you must go down that way. That's not great, in my opinion. I mean, you know, let me know in the comment, guys, what you guys think about tactical reserves rule. Nothing's really changed there. They've just sort of brought it into existence properly now. But yeah, a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth. Again, like I said before in the previous video with the Bolt of Discipline rule, when they bring out a sort of beta rule, generally it'll solidify into the rules. Yes, there'll be tweaks here and there on occasion, but you know, we knew this one was coming. I just kind of hope that they backtrack on it slightly, or maybe just tweak it a little bit. But you know, it is what it is, and that's the rules. That's what we play to. And then there's a little bit of twaddle, which you can absolutely read at your own leisure. Balance reviews. I'm not going to go into depth about these guys because I think this video's gone on far too long as it is. But they're talking about the Imperial Knight stratagems. A really good balance. I haven't actually played against an Imperial Knight army rocking a Castellan. But I've watched a lot of content where they are just very powerful. So this helps to address that ever so slightly. There's a bit about Orc stratagems, craft world psychic powers, and a tiny bit about points values for Knight Castellans. But effectively, that's all very specific to an army that you play. The Imperial Knight one's probably worth looking over, even if you are not an Imperial Knight player, because they're quite prevalent. as are the Orcs, Gene Stealer Cult. So, you know, it's always worth having a look at other people's armies, or other people's armies erratas, and just seeing what the changes are. See your current when you're playing against other people. Been a very, very long video, and if you've stayed to the end, you are champions. Absolutely brilliant. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we hope to see you very, very soon. Happy gaming.